I think it's safe to say that anime fans are pretty sick of stuck-in-another-world light novel stories. We've seen them time and again, they're only rarely good, and yet studios keep making more of them. It's gotten to the point where a lot of people will write a show off entirely simply because it has that premise. That's a good survival tactic on principle, but in practice, it'll lead you to miss two of the best shows this year, Konosuba and Re:Zero, both of which play with the concept in intriguing ways. Konosuba is a hysterical spoof of the shows that have given the subgenre a bad name, while Re:Zero explores the more traumatic realities of life in a video game-like world. Both shows fundamentally represent a reaction to the sensation that is Sword Art Online. They aim to address its problems and in doing so make something better, but their approaches couldn't be more different for the most part. Konosuba lampoons the inherent absurdity of SAO's tropes and general premise, and while its sense of humor can be rather mean-spirited, especially when it spoofs Kirito directly, it has a defiantly upbeat tone, in intentional contrast with how dour and edgy these shows tend to be. Re:Zero, meanwhile, looks at what was inherently interesting about SAO's concept, the horror angle mainly, and tries to finally make good on that promise. It takes a game mechanic that most other game world escapist fantasies conveniently forget, respawning, and explores how horrifying it would be to actually experience that in a manner similar to Dark Souls. In essence, Konosuba takes the SAO formula and brightens it up through the liberal application of comedy, while Re:Zero darkens it in an attempt to make it, well, actually dark and interesting as opposed to just juvenile and edgy. And these different approaches are reflected clearly in their OPs. Konosuba's OP starts with a sunrise over a picturesque fantasy world as the singer goes on about how beautiful it is, leading up to a shot of Kazuma triumphantly reaching out to grab at a metaphorical representation of his dreams. Re:Zero starts with our protagonist Subaru's disemboweled corpse magically pulling itself together before he's confronted with something even more horrifying. The difference couldn't be much starker if they tried. Each OP has a clear and contrasting message to convey, but we'd be here all day if I kept comparing them back and forth, and it'd make mixing the music of this very difficult. So let's start with Re:Zero. By the way, this has been driving me nuts. It's Re:Zero, not Re:Zero. Re is in English like you'd see in the subject line of an email. I know you're weebs, but you don't have to say everything so goddamn weeby. In a direct allusion to the time travel focus of the show's plot, Re:Zero's OP begins where it ends, with Subaru's guts and groceries spilled out on the floor. The black and white color palette both gives the scene an eerie atmosphere and obscures the gore enough that it doesn't have to be censored for TV, which would be kind of lame since the animation on it is pretty impressive. In a brief flash, we see a hulking shape with hollowed out red eyes, followed by what looks like a Mabeast, and finally we see a mural depicting the shape creating the Mabeasts with magic. That would make this the Witch of Gluttony, Daphne, who originally created the beast, which is a pretty far-off plot point to hide right at the start of the intro. Next, we see an image of Satella, the Jealous Witch, staring back at us with a tilted, malevolent grin. Since she seems to be the source of Subaru's return by death ability, it makes sense that he'd see her in the darkness as he's yanked back in time. Next, we see Subaru's shocked face imposed against a storybook sketch of the city's castle, perhaps hinting at the future importance of the queen selections. And finally, a skull with its mouth gaping open. As these shots flash by, they're surrounded by distinctly runic-looking characters, although they're so stretched that it's hard to pick out exactly what they're supposed to be. My best guess is that the text is a corruption of the Japanese katakana and kanji writing system, possibly mixed with other runic languages. It's pretty hard to decipher, but we are given one clue at the title card, which is shown written in these runes before being translated into something we can read. The most recognizable character to me is this one, which looks a lot like the katakana for Ri, which would suggest to me that maybe this is meant to be read right to left. These look like they could be archaic kanji, but I don't even know my regular kanji, so I'll leave that to someone who does to fully decipher, assuming I'm not talking out of my butt. Regardless of their individual meaning, these shots seem to foreshadow serious events yet to come, so it's probably good that they're not easily readable. Following this, we see the series' principal cast spinning around in a dark fog as images of them flicker in and out of existence. The way that they blink in and out, change position, and shift between different expressions would seem to imply that they represent the different sides we see of these characters across different timelines. The first half of this is capped off with the three characters standing under the steady, unshifting gaze of the arch villain Elsa, hinting that no matter what Subaru tries, he won't be able to avoid fighting her. The fact that Rosewall is depicted in a similar way to Elsa creates an air of suspicion about him right away, but based on the season up to this point, the only implication of this seems to be that he, like her, is a constant regardless of the timeline. These flashes give us us a small idea of each character's disposition, but the one with the most interesting implications by far is the shot of Rem back-to-back with her sister Ram. Ram was shown with fairly standard character shots of the two of them, but behind Rem we see a ghostly image of her sister that, judging from her reaction, seems to be haunting her. Since every other image like this represents a different timeline, this specter of Ram can be taken to represent what she could have been had she not lost her horn trying to protect Rem. As we find out, this burden is what drives Rem to be the perfectionist that she is. As we come out of the haze into the light, the music takes on a more mellow tone, and we see Emilia standing with her arms open to Subaru. At first, this might strike you as an endearing image, but take note of Emilia's reflection in the water. It's backwards. There's something going on with Emilia. It's not so much hinted as it is overtly stated that she has some connection to Satella, the jealous witch. This subtly off, sinister imagery definitely evokes that, and possibly hints at the nature of that connection. This is a story involving time travel, after all, so it's entirely possible that Emilia might go back in time at some point and become Satella. Without warning, the claw representing the curse placed on Subaru lunges forward and pulls Emilia away from him. In a flash, we see a distorted sketch of the castle, indicating that the future has become unclear, before Emilia kind of pops. Subaru is left looking around for her frantically until a future version of himself confidently walks by and tags him out, causing him to disappear in a similar fashion. As this happens, the castle flashes by once again, its image now undistorted, but we also see an ominous close-up on a skull. Then, in a single brief image, we see Subaru making dozens of fruitless attempts to reach Emilia, failing in each timeline, and just like that, he goes from being cool-headed to totally exasperated. The principal cast circles around as Subaru and Emilia stand back-to-back in the dark fog, putting up a united front despite how confusing things are. And then we see a few stylish but simple shots of a few supporting characters. The meaning in this is basically, here's the cast. Now here's the title, after a few more quick flashes of the same shots we've seen before. Finally, we see Subaru running through the darkness toward another version of himself, struggling to tag out and make that final push toward the light. He presses through and on the other side sees all of his friends, or at least all of his waifus, the show knows how to go for a quick sell, standing there waiting for him. But just as he's about to reach them, Satella's hand reaches out once again to pull him back into the darkness. As his face twists in anguish, we see the entire OP reverse itself behind him. Then, in a flash, we see two of the weapons that kill him, Elsa's blade and Rem's flail, and finally we return to exactly where we started, creating a perfect loop, which would seem to be a pretty dismal place to start an episode, but remember, we are returning to zero, and that gives Subaru a chance to try again. And the great thing about his character is that he will keep trying, even if he needs a break every now and then. This OP shows him going through a lot of adversity, but he struggles against it valiantly over and over, and despite the downer ending, there's an undercurrent of hope, which, if you get down to it, is the big thing that sets dark tragedy like this apart from an edgy melodrama like SAO. SAO heaps misery on its cast because being tortured is deep and cool. ReZero does it to give them an opportunity to prove themselves and overcome. It's a test of, and testament to, the human spirit. But that's just one way to outdo SAO. The flip side of tragedy is comedy, and that's where Konosuba comes in. As we're brought into the title card, we start on a much less drab note. Kazuma Sato, Aqua, Megumin, and Darkness bob their heads along to the theme song and gaze up at the bright blue sky. This OP follows a pretty simple narrative arc as Aqua and Sato fail quests multiple times before finally succeeding by the skin of their teeth. It's kind of light on symbolism, but it's heavy on fast, blink-and-you-miss-them jokes. We enter on Sato and Aqua as they start their day outside the barn where they're sleeping, gazing out confidently at the city. Sato looks back at Aqua. She returns a goofy smile. They stand up, get their equipment ready, and promptly get obliterated by a single troll and a bunch of forest creatures, ending the day with their faces in the dirt and their asses in the air. This joke works on an inversion of expectations. In pretty much every shonen anime opening, characters gearing up to fight are met invariably with success, not humiliating defeat. Of course, that's not quite as funny the second time you watch it, but the expressive artwork was enough to make me chuckle at this and most of the other gags in the OP for the entire duration of the first season. The next day they pick up Megumin stuffing her face at the Adventurer's Bar. The way that she's eating and the contrast between her and the decidedly mature-looking barmaids highlights her childishness. It's also telling that she's eating alone despite having quite a spread in front of her. Darkness, meanwhile, stands confidently in the town square with people looking up at her. She's someone people can believe in, or so it seems until her true nature is revealed, a gag that's thankfully not spoiled much in this intro, though it is hinted at in a moment. The next few shots go by quickly, but they provide a clear picture of the cast personalities. With their party together, they once again set out on an adventure. Aqua walking with an exaggerated, overconfident stride that contrasts humorously with her desperate, undignified scrambling to get away from the Minotaur that they encounter in the dungeon. As she's freaking out, Megumin lies useless on the floor. Darkness stands alone against the monster, and Kazuma defiantly holds her back, probably not so much out of a desire to fight as a conviction that if he's gonna die, she's gonna die with him. Yet, for as dangerous as this world appears to be, they have no trouble falling asleep in the middle of the woods surrounded by monsters. These characters are more or less oblivious to the actual looming danger all around them, but they also look pretty happy. Ignorance is bliss, after all. Except in Aqua's case, she's probably going to be a little upset when that worm thing tries to eat her head. As the next shot shows, though, she'd pretty much have it coming. In a quick setup and punchline, we see Aqua being petty and laughing at Subaru as he struggles to find footing on a giant lily pad. This destabilizes the one that she was standing on, so she ends up falling in the water too. The swift slapstick comeuppance is a gag as old as film, but it never really gets old. Finally, we see the party dragging themselves home at the end of the day, Subaru carrying Megumin after she's expended her one-use explosion spell, Aqua sobbing pathetically, and Darkness enjoying the humiliation and discomfort. This is the only glimpse that we get at the masochistic side of her personality in the OP, but like I said, I'm glad that they saved that joke for the show itself. It's worth noting at this stage that the OP is marking time through a cycle of sunrises and sunsets, and the only part of the OP that's out of step with that is this montage, which makes me think that it may have been storyboarded in this order, but edited into this order later to better fit the music and help the jokes hit harder. The OP slows down for a moment as Aqua dances across the screen and presents the episode title to us in a manner that I can't help finding adorable, even though I know she's a horrible person. With a flourish, she brings us to Kazuma, who feels an inexplicable warmth growing in his heart as the lyrics assure him that it's okay to believe in himself and the world around him. With another flourish, Aqua casts a buff on the party as they get ready to fight off a horde of rock monsters, and they do a much better job of it this time around. Darkness manages to hit the rock golem with her sword, which is a little out of character, but the OP is entitled to a few artistic liberties. Sato, meanwhile, tries attacking one of these goofy-looking rock things to little effect as Aqua cheers him on, also to little effect. It's worth noting at this point that many of the monster designs we've seen so far are parodies of monsters from famous role-playing franchises. For instance, the troll we saw earlier was lifted straight from Dragon Quest, as were these little guys, commonly known as rock bombs. They like to explode, which Kazuma should really know being the huge otaku that he is, but that doesn't stop him from making the darn things blow up. Fortunately, Darkness sees him blasting off again and defies physics to rescue him in a gorgeously animated action shot. Megumin counters with an equally gorgeous explosion of her own, which we see from a few different really impressive camera angles. Really impressive. I don't know, I really like this one for some reason. The explosion blows away the monsters and almost the entire party, but in the aftermath they pull themselves up and confirm with their doofy smiles that everything is daijobu. And man, do I ever love these expressions. They really make the OP, heck, they make the whole show. Konosuba draws on the same animation principles set in place by Ren and Stimpy, striving to never show a character with the same face twice. The OP caps off with all of the supporting cast striking cheerful poses, Wiz in her magic shop, the adventurers in the guild bar, Chris on a rooftop, Dullahan probably having just rolled his head under Wiz's skirt in the Overlord's castle, Kyoya with his dumb harem, the barmaids at the guild, and then Yunyun, even though she only appears in the OVA, which you really need to watch if you haven't, seriously. After a smile from the Adventurers Guild staff, we see the whole party looking out over the city, an unambiguously triumphant image to bring us into the show itself, which is emblematic of not just Konosuba's story structure, but the nature of comedy. We can only laugh because of the assurance that no matter how hectic things get, they'll turn out alright in the end. Konosuba subverts SAO's typical nonsense in a lot of ways, but this is the biggest. Obviously, in any of these shows, except misery porn like Grimgar, things will go the hero's way when all is said and done, because at their heart they're typical shonen series, yet they constantly pretend that everything is hyper edgy, doom and gloom. In Konosuba, the show never pretends like things aren't gonna work out. The only time Kazuma ever really suffers is when he forgets that, acts like a miserable, pessimistic jackass, Kirito, and looks the fool for it. The same applies to Aqua, who's the butt of most jokes because she's the quickest to complain. Everything that goes wrong for the sake of comedy. ReZero is about characters trying to be happy despite how shitty their world is. Konosuba is about characters trying to be happy despite how shitty they are. The world around them is actually kind of wonderful. Hey, that's even in the name. The common denominator here is that they're trying, which is something that characters in shitty shows almost never do, because shitty writers have gotten it into their heads that trying isn't cool. That's another one of the lines between legitimately dark and edgy. Seeing characters come up against adversity and make an effort is what makes them likable. That's not the only factor, of course, but it's something that both Konosuba and ReZero do well in their own ways, and it's a trait that their OPs exemplify. By the way, you can watch both Konosuba and ReZero on Crunchyroll, and you can get a 2-week free trial for that at crunchyroll.com/basement. Just saying, it's a good deal. Hope you guys enjoyed this OP double feature. It's been a long time since I did one of these, but I figure it's been a while since I did a proper What's in an OP, so I kinda owe all of you. If you want to see me talk about another fantasy show that gets it right, click on this here Spice and Wolf video. Or if you want to see more of one that gets it very, very wrong, I've done a few other things about SAO. To make sure you see more videos like this and those every week forever, subscribe to Mother's Basement and turn on notifications by hitting the little gear next to the subscribe button to ensure my channel stays on your front page feed, because YouTube can be dumb about that otherwise. If you really want to help the channel out, consider pledging your support to my Patreon campaign, like the handsome, intelligent mofos whose names you're seeing on screen right now. I cannot thank these guys or anyone else who supports me enough. You are the best. And I am Jeff Thu, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.